What do you do when four armed terrorists storm your workplace, and you're the only thing standing between them and 3,000 innocent lives? Most people would run. Most people would hide. But what if you're not most people? What if you're a retired Army Ranger who's been pretending to be harmless for so long, everyone forgot you were once lethal? My name is Frank Morrison, and this is the day I stopped being invisible. But what nobody knew, not the terrorists, not my colleagues, not even the FBI, was that this attack wasn't random. And the biggest shock wasn't that I could still fight. It was discovering who had sent these killers after me. The morning of December 15th, 2023, started like any other meaningless day at Westfield Shopping Center, but the ghosts were louder than usual. I clocked in at 6 a.m. sharp, same as I had for 3 years, 4 months, and 23 days. Not that anyone was counting except me. At 64 years old, wearing a polyester security uniform that hung loose on my once powerful frame, I had become part of the furniture. Background noise in a world that had moved on without me. "Morning, Grandpa Frank," sneered Jessica, the 19-year-old store manager at Hot Topic, as I made my first patrol round. She didn't even look up from her iPhone, too busy posting selfies to Instagram to notice that the man she was mocking had once been photographed shaking hands with a sitting president after single-handedly saving an entire Afghan village from a Taliban massacre. What Jessica didn't know, what none of them knew, was that these same hands adjusting my too-loose security belt had once assembled M4 carbines in complete darkness under enemy fire. These eyes that now struggled to read incident reports without reading glasses had once spotted IED triggers from 400 meters away in the dusty roads of Helmand province. This body that wheezed climbing stairs had once carried 3 wounded soldiers through Taliban crossfire for 8 miles in the Hindu Kush mountains, taking 2 bullets in the process and still managing to call in the airstrike that saved his unit. But that was a lifetime and 3 Purple Hearts ago. In this fluorescent-lit retail purgatory, I was nobody. The nightmares had been getting worse lately. Every night, the same dream. I'm back in the mountains outside Kabul, 2008, leading a rescue operation to extract a captured CIA operative. The intel was solid, the plan was perfect, the execution was flawless. What nobody had told us was that the whole thing was a setup, orchestrated by someone inside our own government who needed that CIA man dead and buried with no questions asked. I woke up every morning at 3:47 a.m., the exact time the IED had exploded under our convoy, killing 6 of the best soldiers I'd ever served with and leaving me with a lifetime of wondering who had sold us out. The Army investigation had concluded it was just bad luck, wrong place, wrong time, enemy action. But I knew better. Someone with access to classified mission details had leaked our route, our timing, our objective. Someone had wanted us dead, and 15 years later I was still trying to figure out who. The morning brought its usual parade of petty humiliations, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that reminded me of those moments before a mission went sideways. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it the survival instincts of a man who'd lived through too many ambushes to ignore the warning signs. At 7:30 a.m., I caught 3 teenagers attempting to shoplift energy drinks from the convenience store. When I approached them, the lead kid, couldn't have been more than 16, looked me up and down and laughed. "What are you gonna do, old man? Chase us?" He wasn't wrong. My knees hadn't been right since that IED explosion, and the doctors had told me I was lucky to be walking at all. My left shoulder ached constantly from shrapnel that the Army surgeons had never quite managed to remove completely. Apparently, the pieces were too close to major arteries to risk extraction. In a foot race with teenagers, I'd lose every time. So I did what security guards do. I called the real cops and watched the kids disappear into the crowd, unpunished and unrepentant. But as they ran, one of them turned back and shouted something that made my blood freeze. "See you later, Sergeant Morrison." How did a random teenage shoplifter know my military rank? I keyed my radio immediately. "Sarah, this is Frank. I need you to pull the security footage from the convenience store, timestamp 730. Those kids knew information they shouldn't have." "Frank, it's probably just a lucky guess," came Sarah's voice through the static. "You know how kids are these days with their internet research." But it wasn't a lucky guess. In 3 years of working mall security, I'd never mentioned my military service to anyone except my boss during the hiring process. My personnel file was locked, my DD-214 was sealed, and I'd gone to great lengths to keep my past separate from my present. So how did a 16-year-old punk know I'd been a sergeant? The question gnawed at me as I continued my morning rounds. At 8:15 a.m., I was walking past the GameStop when I noticed something else that shouldn't have been there. A man in his 30s, sitting alone at the food court, nursing the same cup of coffee he'd been drinking for 40 minutes while watching me through mirrored sunglasses. professional surveillance. I'd been the subject of enough government watchers in my day to recognize the signs. The way he held his body, the positioning that gave him clear sightlines to multiple exits, the subtle way he spoke into his collar when he thought I wasn't looking. Someone was having me watched. The question was who, and more importantly, why now? But that question was about to be answered in the most terrifying way possible. At 9:30 a.m., mall manager Patricia Williams appeared at my shoulder with her trademark condescending smile, but today there was something else in her expression, something that looked almost like pity. "Frank, I need you to come to my office for a moment. There's someone who wants to talk to you." Patricia had been riding me for months, looking for any excuse to replace me with someone younger, cheaper, more energetic. At 34, she'd never lived through anything more dangerous than a difficult Starbucks order. She had no idea that the man she was treating like yesterday's garbage had once been personally thanked by 3 different secretaries of defense for his service to the nation. But the look in her eyes today wasn't her usual bureaucratic disdain. It was the look of someone who just learned that the harmless old man she'd been bullying was actually something much more dangerous. And that terrified her. Her office was on the 2nd floor of the mall, overlooking the main concourse through floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a perfect view of the entire shopping center. Waiting for me was a man I'd hoped never to see again. Colonel Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army Intelligence, retired. The same Colonel Thorne who debriefed me after the Kabul mission in 2008. The same Colonel Thorne who'd assured me that the investigation into our ambush would be thorough and complete. The same Colonel Thorne who'd looked me in the eye and promised that whoever had sold out my unit would be brought to justice. The same Colonel Thorne who I'd always suspected was the one who'd sent us into that trap. "Hello, Frank," he said, standing to shake my hand with the same firm grip I remembered from 15 years ago. "You're looking well." He wasn't. At 67, Thorne looked every year of his age and then some. His once thick hair was completely gray now, his face was lined with deep creases, and there was a tremor in his left hand that suggested either medication or stress. But his eyes were the same cold, calculating, and completely without mercy. "Colonel," I replied, not bothering to keep the suspicion out of my voice, "this is unexpected." "I imagine it is. Please sit down. We need to talk." Patricia made herself scarce, closing the door behind her and leaving me alone with the man who might have been responsible for the deaths of 6 of my brothers in arms. The silence stretched between us like a live wire, charged with 15 years of unanswered questions and unresolved suspicions. "You've done well for yourself here," Thorne said finally, gesturing toward the window that overlooked the mall. "Quiet job, steady pay, nobody bothering you. I can see the appeal. Cut the small talk, Colonel. What do you want?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Direct as always. I appreciate that about you, Frank. It's one of the reasons I've kept tabs on you over the years. So I had been under surveillance. The question was for how long and, more importantly, why. The reason I'm here," Thorne continued, "is that we have a problem. A mutual problem that requires your particular set of skills. I'm retired, Colonel, have been for 15 years, find someone else. I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, Frank, the problem is coming to you whether you want it or not. In fact, it should be arriving." He checked his watch, an expensive piece that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. In approximately 4 hours. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. "What are you talking about?" Thorne reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder thick with photographs, documents, and intelligence reports. He slid it across the desk to me with the casual air of a man delivering someone else's death sentence. "Take a look." The first photograph showed 4 men in their late 20s to early 30s, all with the lean, hard look of professional killers. Eastern European features, military-style haircuts, the kind of scars that came from surviving conflicts in places where the Geneva Convention was just a suggestion. The second photograph showed the same 4 men entering Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport 2 days ago, carrying legitimate passports under obviously false names. The third photograph showed them checking into a hotel 6 miles from Westfield Shopping Center. The fourth photograph showed them conducting surveillance on me. "Who are they?" I asked, though I was already afraid I knew the answer. "Kazimir Volkov, Dmitry Petrov, Alexei Sokolov, and Viktor Kozlov," Thorne recited from memory. "Former Spetsnaz operators discharged under less than honorable circumstances. Since 2018, they've been working as freelance contractors for various criminal organizations and hostile foreign governments. What do they want with me?" Thorne leaned back in his chair, studying me with those cold eyes. "Do you remember Operation Nightfall, Frank?" How could I forget? Operation Nightfall was the mission that destroyed my unit, the mission that killed 6 good men, the mission that ended my military career and left me with nightmares that still wake me up every night 15 years later. "Of course I remember." What you don't know, what you couldn't have known, is that the CIA operative you were sent to rescue wasn't actually CIA. He was FSB, Russian intelligence, operating under deep cover within the American intelligence community for over a decade. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. We vetted the mission, we confirmed the intelligence. The intelligence was manufactured, Frank. The whole operation was a Russian plot to eliminate one of their own assets who had become a liability while simultaneously testing the capabilities of our special operations units. You and your team were never meant to survive that mission. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not just that we'd been set up, but that we'd been used as unwitting pawns in a game between intelligence agencies that saw soldiers' lives as acceptable losses. But here's the interesting part, Thorne continued. You did survive. Not only did you survive, but you managed to complete the mission objectives and extract valuable intelligence that led to the exposure and elimination of an entire Russian spy network. The FSB has spent the last 15 years trying to figure out how one American soldier managed to single-handedly destroy a decade of their careful planning. So they sent a kill team after me. Eventually, yes. But first, they tried subtlety. Does the name Elena Kozlova mean anything to you? The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Elena Kozlova, the beautiful Russian woman I'd met at a veterans support group 3 years ago. Elena, who'd listened to my stories of combat trauma with such understanding and compassion. Elena, who'd shared my bed for 6 months before disappearing one morning with no explanation, taking with her my trust, my heart, and apparently detailed intelligence about my current life and location. The woman I'd fallen in love with had been a Russian spy. She was FSB, Thorne confirmed, reading the recognition in my expression. Deep cover operative tasked with getting close to you, learning your routines, your weaknesses, your psychological profile. She reported back that you were a broken-down old soldier living a quiet life, no longer a threat to Russian interests. But they decided to kill me anyway. Not exactly. The kill order came from someone else entirely. Someone who has their own reasons for wanting Frank Morrison dead. Thorne pulled out another photograph, this one showing a man in an expensive suit standing outside what looked like a government building. I didn't recognize the face, but something about the eyes seemed familiar. Senator Richard Blackwood, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Does the name ring any bells? It didn't, but Thorne wasn't finished. Blackwood was a lieutenant colonel in Army intelligence 15 years ago. He was also the officer who authorized Operation Nightfall and personally selected your unit for the mission. The pieces of a 15-year-old conspiracy were finally falling into place, and the picture they formed made me sick to my stomach. Blackwood was working with the Russians, I asked. Blackwood was working for himself, Thorne corrected. He was selling intelligence to multiple foreign governments, not just Russia, but China, North Korea, Iran. Operation Nightfall was supposed to eliminate both the Russian asset who could expose him and your entire unit, who knew too much about the mission parameters. But I survived. You survived, and worse, you brought back intelligence that could potentially link Blackwood to the leak. He spent the last 15 years building a political career while living in fear that someday you might piece together what really happened in Afghanistan. So he hired Russian assassins to tie up loose ends. Thorne shook his head. He hired them to stage a terrorist attack that would kill you along with hundreds of innocent civilians, making your death look like collateral damage rather than targeted assassination. The FSB team gets to complete their own mission of eliminating you. Blackwood gets his political liability erased, and both sides blame it on random terrorism. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal and conspiracy that stretched back 15 years and reached into the highest levels of the American government. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If you knew about Blackwood all along, why didn't you expose him years ago? For the first time since entering the room, Thorne looked uncomfortable. Because I was compromised too, Frank. Not by money, by blackmail. Blackwood had evidence of certain indiscretions in my personal life, things that would have destroyed my career and my family. I kept quiet to protect them. And now I'm dying, he said matter-of-factly. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I have maybe 6 months left, probably less. My family is grown, my career is over, and I'm too old to care about scandals. But I'm not too old to want redemption. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the shoppers going about their normal lives, unaware that in a few hours, their ordinary Tuesday afternoon was going to turn into a nightmare. Those 4 Russians are going to hit this mall at exactly 2:47 p.m., he said without turning around. They'll come in through 4 different entrances, heavily armed, with enough explosives to bring down significant portions of the building. Their plan is to kill as many people as possible while specifically targeting you. The official story will be that Islamic terrorists attacked an American shopping center, and your death will be buried in the casualty count. But here's what they don't know. I'm not the same broken-down old soldier Alina reported on 3 years ago. And I'm not planning to go quietly into that dark night. What do you expect me to do about it? I asked, though I was already mentally cataloging the mall's security systems, exit routes, and potential defensive positions. What you do best, Sergeant Morrison, what you've always done best. He turned back to face me, and for the first time I saw something like respect in those cold eyes. You survive, and you make sure the bad guys don't. But surviving was going to be the easy part. The hard part was going to be deciding who to trust when everyone who claimed to be on my side had already betrayed me at least once. Thorne left me with the intelligence files and a promise that FBI backup would be unavailable due to a conveniently timed training exercise. I was on my own, just like I'd been in Afghanistan 15 years ago. The only difference was that this time, I knew I was walking into a trap. I spent the next hour studying the files, memorizing faces, learning everything I could about the men who were coming to kill me. Kazimir Volkov, the team leader, a stone-cold professional who'd reportedly killed over 30 people in conflicts across Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Dmitry Petrov, the explosives expert, a former Spetsnaz engineer who'd been drummed out of the Russian military for conducting unauthorized weapons tests on prisoners of war. Alexei Sokolov, the sniper Olympic-level marksman who turned his skills to assassination after a scandal involving the murder of a Russian journalist. Viktor Kozlov, the muscle, a psychopath who'd been discharged from Russian special forces for excessive brutality even by their standards. 4 professional killers against 1 aging security guard in a crowded shopping mall, with thousands of innocent lives in the crossfire. The smart move would have been to evacuate the building, call in the authorities, let the professionals handle it. But Thorne had made it clear that official channels were compromised, and any attempt to evacuate 3,000 people would tip off the Russians that their target was aware of the threat. Besides, I'd learned something important during my 3 years of being invisible. When people don't see you as a threat, you can accomplish things that seem impossible. The Russians were expecting to face Frank Morrison, the broken-down old veteran who'd been psychologically profiled by their spy. They weren't expecting to face Sergeant Frank Morrison, the man who'd once held off an entire Taliban assault force with nothing but a sidearm and a radio. At 11:30 a.m., I began my preparations. First, I needed weapons. The mall's security office had a gun safe containing 3 Glock 19 pistols and 120 rounds of 9mm ammunition. Not much against professional killers, but better than harsh language. I also liberated a tactical vest from the lost and found that some wannabe soldier had left behind after a paintball game. Second, I needed to know the battlefield. I'd been walking these corridors for 3 years, but now I studied them with a tactical eye. Choke points where a single defender could hold off multiple attackers. Elevation points that would give me clear fields of fire. Escape routes that civilians could use to get out of the killing zone. Third, I needed allies. Not many people in the mall had military training, but I knew of at least 3. Jimmy Rodriguez, a former Marine who ran the knife shop on the 2nd floor. Sarah Chen, an Army veteran who worked mall security dispatch. And surprisingly, Patricia Williams, whose personnel file revealed she'd done 2 tours as a logistics officer in Iraq before getting into mall management. But the most important preparation was psychological. For 3 years, I'd been Frank Morrison, the harmless old man who couldn't catch teenage shoplifters. Starting at 2:47 p.m., I needed to become Sergeant Morrison, the soldier who'd once been recommended for the Medal of Honor before political considerations reduced it to a Bronze Star with Valor device. At 1 p.m., I called a meeting in the security office with my 3 potential allies. Patricia looked confused, Sarah looked concerned, and Jimmy looked like he was already reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "We have a problem," I began, and then I told them everything. The Russian assassination team, the government conspiracy, the planned attack, the thousands of innocent lives at stake. Patricia's reaction was immediate and predictable. "We need to call the police, the FBI, the National Guard." "Already compromised," I interrupted. "The people who sent these killers have connections throughout law enforcement and intelligence. Official channels will either be blocked or will tip off the bad guys that we know they're coming." Sarah was more practical. "What do you need from us?" "Sarah, you control mall communications and security systems. I need you ready to cut power, trigger fire suppression systems, activate lockdown protocols, whatever I call for, no questions asked." She nodded grimly. "Jimmy, I know you keep more than just display knives in that shop of yours. I'm going to need real weapons, and I'm going to need them positioned strategically throughout the mall." His grin was wolfish. "Been waiting 3 years for someone to ask." What kind of party are we planning? Patricia, you know this building better than anyone. I need you to prepare evacuation routes that won't create panic or alert the bad guys that something's wrong. Can you handle that? She was pale but determined. How much time do we have? I checked my watch. 1 hour and 47 minutes. But as we began our preparations, I couldn't shake the feeling that Thorne hadn't told me everything. The plan was too elaborate, too public, too risky for a simple assassination. The Russians and their American sponsor were going to enormous lengths to kill one retired soldier who posed only a theoretical threat, which meant there was something else going on, something bigger than just tying up loose ends from a 15-year-old military operation. The answer came at 1:30 p.m. when I was checking the positions of Jimmy's strategically placed weapons caches. My radio crackled with Sarah's voice, tense with barely controlled panic. "Frank, you need to get to the security office right now. We've got a problem." I found her staring at multiple computer screens, her face white with shock. "I was monitoring police frequencies like you asked, trying to figure out if there was any official response planned. But I picked up something else instead." She turned one of the monitors toward me, showing what looked like a live video feed from inside the mall. Someone was broadcasting our preparations to the outside world. "It gets worse," Sarah continued. "I traced the signal. The cameras aren't ours. Someone has installed their own surveillance system throughout the mall, with military-grade encrypted transmissions going to multiple receivers." We weren't just facing an assassination team. We were starring in someone's twisted reality show. "Who's receiving the feeds?" I asked, though I was already afraid I knew. "Multiple government facilities, several foreign embassies, and—" She paused, double-checking her readings. "And at least 6 major news networks." The full scope of the conspiracy was finally becoming clear. This wasn't just about killing Frank Morrison. This was about creating a national tragedy that could be exploited for political gain. Senator Blackwood and his Russian allies were planning to stage a terrorist attack that would be broadcast live to the world, creating the kind of dramatic footage that could justify new surveillance laws, increased military spending, and expanded government powers. Hundreds of innocent people were going to die to serve someone's political ambitions, and my death was just the opening act. "Sarah, can you disrupt their surveillance network?" "Maybe, but it would take time and they'd know we were onto them." "Don't worry about them knowing. They're going to figure it out soon enough anyway." I keyed my radio to conference all of our allies. "Jimmy, Patricia, this is Frank. Change of plans. This isn't just an assassination, it's a false flag operation designed to create a national incident. We're not just protecting our own lives anymore. We're protecting American democracy." Jimmy's response was immediate. "Well, when you put it like that, I guess we better not fuck it up." But we were about to discover that the conspiracy went even deeper than we'd imagined, and the real enemy wasn't who we thought it was. At 2:15 p.m., 32 minutes before the planned attack, my secure phone, a device I'd kept hidden for 15 years and never expected to use again, rang with an incoming call from a number I'd memorized, but hoped never to see. I answered on the second ring. "This is Morrison." "Hello, Frank." The voice was older, weaker than I remembered, but unmistakable. General Harrison Clark, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the man who'd personally recruited me for the Army's most classified operations, and the only person in the government I'd ever completely trusted. "General Clark, I thought you were dead." Yes, that was the official story. In reality, I've been in hiding for the past 3 years, gathering evidence of a conspiracy that reaches to the very highest levels of our government. If General Clark was alive, if he'd been working undercover for 3 years, then everything I thought I knew about today's attack was wrong. "General, I don't have much time. There's a Russian kill team about to hit my location, and I know all about the Russians, Frank. In fact, I'm the one who sent them." The words hit me like a physical blow. General Clark, my mentor, my commanding officer, the man I'd trusted with my life on dozens of missions, he was behind the attack. "Sir, I don't understand." "The Russians aren't here to kill you, Frank. They're here to help you expose the real conspiracy. Volkov and his team are FSB, yes, but they're also patriots who have discovered that Senator Blackwood has been selling intelligence to multiple foreign governments, including enemies of Russia." My head was spinning. Then why the elaborate deception? Why make it look like they're here to assassinate me? Because the real assassination team is already in place and they're not Russian. They're American. Black Ops contractors working directly for Blackwood, with orders to eliminate everyone who could expose his treason, including you, me, and the Russian agents who have been helping us gather evidence. The entire intelligence briefing from Thorne had been disinformation, designed to make me paranoid about the wrong enemy, while the real killers positioned themselves for an attack I'd never see coming. "How many?" I asked, my training overriding my confusion. 6 shooters plus technical support. They've been in position since dawn, disguised as mall maintenance workers, food court employees, and security guards. They plan to initiate their attack at exactly the same time as the Russians are supposed to arrive, creating confusion about who the real terrorists are. And the Russians will be arriving as planned, but their mission is to protect you and secure evidence of Blackwood's treason. Unfortunately, they don't know about the American kill team any more than the kill team knows about them. So in 30 minutes, I was going to be in the middle of a three-way firefight between Russian FSB agents trying to protect me, American assassins trying to kill me, and 3,000 innocent civilians who had no idea they were about to become collateral damage in a shadow war between competing intelligence agencies. General, with all due respect, this is foobar beyond anything I've ever seen. Agreed, which is why I need you to do something that's going to sound completely insane. I'm listening. I need you to ally yourself with the Russian team and help them fight off the American assassins. The irony was staggering. After 30 years of fighting America's enemies, I was being asked to work with foreign agents against my own countrymen. But if Clark was right, then the real enemies were the Americans who'd betrayed their oath to protect and defend the Constitution. How do I identify the Russians versus the Americans? Volkov's team will be wearing blue tactical vests with FSB identification. The American team will be dressed as various mall employees. But Frank, there's something else you need to know. There was always something else. In intelligence work, there's always another layer to peel back, another betrayal to discover, another twist that makes everything you thought you knew suddenly meaningless. Colonel Thorne, the man who briefed you this morning, he's not working for Senator Blackwood. He's working for me. He's been undercover for the past 5 years, gathering evidence of the conspiracy. The intelligence files he gave you contain everything we need to bring down Blackwood and his network. Then why didn't he tell me the truth about the Russians? Because his cover would have been blown if he'd revealed too much. There are listening devices throughout the mall, planted by Blackwood's people. Thorne had to make his briefing sound convincing to any hostile surveillance while still giving you the tools you needed to survive. I was beginning to understand the complexity of the operation I'd stumbled into. Multiple intelligence agencies, double agents, competing agendas, and enough betrayals to stock a dozen spy novels. General, assuming I survive the next hour, what happens then? Then we take down a sitting U.S. senator and expose a conspiracy that's been selling American secrets for over 15 years. But first, you have to stay alive long enough to testify. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Not just for my own life, or even for the 3,000 innocent people in the mall, but for the integrity of American democracy itself. At 2:35 p.m., 12 minutes before the scheduled attack, I was positioned in the mall's central concourse with a clear view of all major entry points. Sarah was in the security office, ready to control building systems on my command. Jimmy had armed himself with enough knives and improvised weapons to outfit a small army. Patricia was coordinating evacuation procedures that would look routine until they became urgent. And I was about to find out whether a 64-year-old security guard could survive a battle between competing intelligence agencies while protecting thousands of innocent lives. The first sign of trouble came at 2:44 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule. A man dressed as a janitor was moving through the crowd near the north entrance, but his eyes were scanning for targets rather than trash. His movements were too purposeful, too alert for someone whose job involved emptying garbage cans. American assassin, I decided. Time to even the odds. I approached him with the shambling gait I'd perfected over 3 years of being underestimated. Just a harmless old security guard making his rounds, nothing to worry about. When I was close enough, I spoke quietly. "Excuse me, sir, but you're going to need to come with me." He turned, and I saw the moment of recognition in his eyes as he realized that the harmless old security guard was actually his primary target. His hand moved toward a concealed weapon, but muscle memory from 30 years of combat kicked in. I grabbed his wrist, twisted it until something snapped, and put him in a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in 8 seconds. One down. But as I dragged his body behind a service counter, my radio crackled with Sarah's voice. "Frank, we've got movement at all entrances. Multiple teams, all armed, all moving with military coordination." The battle for Westfield Shopping Center was about to begin, and I still wasn't entirely sure who was on which side. At 2:47 p.m. exactly, the mall erupted into chaos. The first shots came from the food court, where one of the American assassins had opened fire on a group of shoppers who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Simultaneously, 4 men in blue tactical vests burst through the north entrance, weapons drawn, moving with the disciplined formation of professional soldiers. The Russian FSB team, right on schedule. But as they advanced toward the central concourse, they came under fire from three different directions, not from me, but from the American kill team that had been lying in wait. I was watching a three-way battle unfold in real time, with innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The Russians were good, very good. They moved with the coordinated precision of a unit that had trained together for years, using covering fire and tactical movement to advance while minimizing exposure to enemy positions. But they were outnumbered and outgunned by the Americans, who had the advantage of prepared positions and detailed knowledge of the mall's layout. I had to make a choice. Which side was I on? The decision was made for me when one of the American assassins lined up a shot on a young mother who was trying to shield her infant from the gunfire. He was using her as bait, hoping one of the Russians would break cover to save her. I put 2 rounds center mass into the assassin before he could pull the trigger. That officially made me an ally of the Russian FSB against my own government's Black Ops team. The irony wasn't lost on me. The battle moved through the mall like a deadly game of three-dimensional chess. The Americans had superior numbers and positioning, but the Russians had superior training and discipline. I had intimate knowledge of the terrain, and the element of surprise. Nobody expected the mall security guard to be a combat-effective ally of foreign intelligence agents. But the real game changer was Sarah's control over the mall's systems. At my radio command, she cut power to specific sections, creating darkness that favored my night combat training. She triggered fire suppression systems that reduced visibility and created chaos. She activated lockdown protocols that sealed off certain areas while leaving others open for tactical movement. We were turning the mall itself into a weapon against the assassins. The firefight lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, 5 American assassins were dead, 1 was in custody, and the Russian FSB team had secured enough evidence to expose Senator Blackwood's conspiracy to the world. But the cost was higher than I'd hoped. 3 innocent civilians had been killed in the crossfire, and another dozen were wounded. Patricia had taken a bullet in the shoulder while helping evacuate a group of elderly shoppers. Jimmy had been grazed by shrapnel when one of the assassins tried to use a grenade to clear the knife shop. We'd won the battle, but the victory felt hollow when measured in innocent blood. The aftermath was a bureaucratic nightmare that lasted months. The FBI, CIA, NSA, and half a dozen other agencies all wanted to debrief me, interrogate me, and decide whether I was a hero or a traitor. The Russian FSB team was granted diplomatic immunity and sent home with thanks from a grateful American government. Senator Blackwood was arrested, tried for treason, and sentenced to life in prison. Colonel Thorne was revealed to be General Clark's deep cover asset and received a Presidential Medal of Freedom for his years of undercover service. Elena Kozlova, the Russian spy who'd broken my heart, was traded back to Moscow in exchange for 3 captured American agents. And me, I went back to work as a mall security guard, making $12.50 an hour and walking patrol in a polyester uniform that hung loose on my aging frame. Because that's what Rangers do. We go where we're needed, we do what's necessary, and then we go back to our posts and wait for the next time our country calls. But if you think that was the end of the story, you haven't been paying attention. Because 3 months after the Westfield incident, I started receiving messages from someone who claimed to know the real truth about what had happened that day. The messages came through dead drops, encrypted emails, and coded personal ads in newspapers, all the tradecraft of professional intelligence work. Someone with serious training and resources was trying to make contact, and they were being very careful not to be traced. The first message was simple. The mall was just the opening move. The real game is about to begin. A friend, I ignored it. I'd had enough of conspiracies and shadow wars to last several lifetimes. The second message was more specific. Blackwood was a middle manager. His handlers are still free, still planning, still dangerous. They know you're the one who exposed their operation. A friend, that one got my attention. If there were surviving members of the conspiracy, if they blamed me for Blackwood's exposure, then I might still be in danger. The third message changed everything. Your unit wasn't ambushed in Afghanistan. They were murdered. The real killers are planning to finish the job. Check your mail. A friend, the package was waiting in my apartment mailbox when I got home from work that evening. Inside was a thick manila envelope containing photographs, documents, and a digital storage device that would have been worth millions to the right intelligence agency. The photographs showed the ambush site in Afghanistan from angles I'd never seen before, aerial surveillance images taken by American drones that had been circling overhead during our mission. But according to the official reports, no American aircraft had been in the area at the time of the attack. Someone had been watching our unit get massacred, and they'd done nothing to help. The documents were even more damning. Classified communications between various government agencies, discussing the need to eliminate compromised assets and unreliable witnesses from Operation Nightfall. My name appeared on multiple lists of individuals requiring permanent resolution, but the digital storage device contained the most shocking revelation of all. Video footage from the helmet cameras worn by my unit during the final mission. Footage that had supposedly been destroyed in the IED blast, but had actually been recovered and classified at the highest levels of government. I watched my brothers die all over again, but this time I could see what I'd missed in the chaos of combat. The IED that destroyed our convoy hadn't been triggered by enemy action. It had been detonated by remote control from an American surveillance drone. The Taliban fighters who'd attacked us afterward hadn't been lying in ambush. They'd been hired mercenaries wearing enemy uniforms. My unit had been murdered by our own government, and the attack had been designed to look like enemy action. The implications were staggering. If the government was willing to kill American soldiers to protect its secrets, then there was no limit to what they might do to silence witnesses. And I was the only surviving witness to Operation Nightfall. I should have run. I should have taken the evidence and disappeared into whatever deep cover identity the witness protection program could provide. Instead, I did something that probably qualifies as either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I decided to fight back. The first step was finding out who a friend really was. The messages were sophisticated enough to suggest government training, but the willingness to expose classified information suggested someone operating outside official channels. Either a rogue agent or a whistleblower with access to the highest levels of intelligence. I used tradecraft that I'd hoped never to need again: surveillance detection routes, covert communications, digital forensics techniques that pushed my aging brain to its limits. But gradually, I began to piece together clues about my mysterious contact. The breakthrough came when I recognized a piece of syntax in one of the encrypted messages, a specific way of phrasing tactical instructions that I'd only seen used by one person in my entire military career. Sergeant Major Rachel Torres, the best intelligence analyst the Army had ever produced, and the only person who'd questioned the official story of Operation Nightfall from the very beginning. I'd thought she was dead. The official records showed that she'd been killed in a car accident in Virginia 6 months after my unit was ambushed. But if she was a friend, then she'd been in hiding for 15 years, gathering evidence of the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. Finding her took 3 weeks of careful investigation. She was living under a false identity in a small town in Montana, working as a librarian and trying to blend into a quiet civilian life. But when I knocked on her door at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, she wasn't surprised to see me. "Hello, Frank," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." Rachel looked older than her years. The stress of living in hiding had aged her more than time alone could account for. But her eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, still burning with the righteous anger of someone who'd seen too much corruption and refused to accept it. "You've been investigating this conspiracy for 15 years?" I asked. "Investigating it, documenting it, and trying to find someone with enough credibility and combat experience to help me expose it." She gestured toward a wall covered with photographs, documents, and connecting lines that looked like the work of either a brilliant investigator or a complete paranoid. "You were always my first choice, but I had to wait until you were ready to see the truth." The truth, as she laid it out over the next 4 hours, was more horrifying than anything I'd imagined. Operation Nightfall hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic program to eliminate American military personnel who'd gained knowledge of classified programs that were considered too sensitive for normal security protocols. Over the past 20 years, dozens of special operations soldiers had died in training accidents, enemy action, and friendly fire incidents that were actually targeted assassinations. The program was run by a shadow organization within the intelligence community, not accountable to Congress, not subject to oversight, not bound by law or ethics or basic human decency. They called themselves the Cleanup Crew, and their mission was to eliminate any evidence of American involvement in operations that could prove embarrassing or politically damaging. My unit had been murdered because we'd discovered that the CIA operative we'd been sent to rescue was actually running a torture facility, where American intelligence agents were experimenting on prisoners in violation of international law. "How many people know about this?" I asked. "You, me, and maybe 6 other survivors scattered around the world. Everyone else who tried to investigate the cleanup crew has either disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. So what's the plan? How do we expose something this big when the people responsible control most of the intelligence apparatus?" Rachel smiled grimly. "We don't expose them through official channels. We expose them through public revelations so dramatic and undeniable that even the most corrupt government officials won't be able to cover it up. She wanted to stage a public confrontation that would force the cleanup crew to reveal themselves, creating the kind of media spectacle that would make it impossible to deny the truth. "That's insane," I told her. "They'll kill us both before we can get the story out." "They're going to kill us anyway," she replied. "At least this way we can take them down with us." The plan she outlined was audacious to the point of madness. We would leak selected portions of the evidence to multiple news organizations simultaneously, creating a media frenzy that would force the cleanup crew to respond. When they sent assassins after us, and they would, because that's what they always did, we would document their activities and broadcast them live to the world. We were going to turn our own assassination into a public relations disaster for the shadow government. "You realize this is a suicide mission," I pointed out. "Everything we've done since Afghanistan has been a suicide mission," Rachel replied. "The difference is that now we get to choose how we die." 6 months later, I was back at Westfield Shopping Center, working my same $12.50 an hour job and wearing the same polyester uniform that hung loose on my aging frame. But everything had changed. Rachel and I had spent those 6 months carefully orchestrating the exposure of the cleanup crew. We'd leaked documents to journalists in 6 different countries, uploaded video evidence to multiple internet platforms, and sent detailed testimony to every member of Congress who'd shown even marginal interest in intelligence oversight. The response had been swift and predictable. 3 journalists died in accidents, 2 congressmen were arrested on trumped-up corruption charges, and every internet platform mysteriously experienced technical difficulties that resulted in our evidence being deleted. But we'd expected that. The cleanup crew's response to exposure was always the same: kill the witnesses and destroy the evidence, which was exactly what we were counting on. The trap was set for March 15th, the 2-year anniversary of the Westfield incident. We'd leaked enough information to make it clear that I was the source of the revelations about the cleanup crew, and we'd made sure they knew exactly where to find me. I was working my usual patrol route when they came 6 assassins dressed as shoppers, moving with the coordinated precision of a professional kill team. They thought they were hunting one aging security guard who'd stumbled onto information he shouldn't have. What they didn't know was that the entire mall was wired with surveillance equipment, broadcast cameras, and enough recording devices to document every moment of their attack for a global audience. Rachel had spent months infiltrating the mall's technical systems, installing hidden cameras and transmission equipment that would stream live video to news organizations around the world. The moment the assassins revealed themselves, their attack would be broadcast to millions of viewers who would witness the shadow government's enforcement arm in action. The firefight began at 3:17 p.m. during the busy afternoon shopping rush. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. Rachel had recruited a team of military veterans, men and women who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and who'd lost friends to accidents that now seemed suspiciously convenient. Former Marine Sergeant David Kim, who'd been investigating the death of his best friend in a training mishap until his own family was threatened. Former Army Captain Lisa Johnson, whose husband had died in a helicopter crash just days before he was scheduled to testify about war crimes he'd witnessed. Former Navy SEAL Mike Thompson, who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan only to discover that his unit had been deliberately sent into a trap during their final mission. We were all survivors of the cleanup crew's operations, and we'd all decided that we'd rather die fighting than live in fear. The battle raged through the mall for 23 minutes, broadcast live on every major news network, and streamed to social media platforms around the globe. This time, there was no way to cover up what was happening. Millions of people were watching American intelligence operatives gun down civilians in a shopping center, while a group of military veterans fought back with everything they had. When it was over, 4 of the 6 assassins were dead, 1 was in critical condition, and 1 had been taken alive. More importantly, the world had seen undeniable proof that the American government was willing to murder its own citizens to protect state secrets. The political firestorm that followed brought down 2 cabinet secretaries, 3 generals, and the entire leadership of the cleanup crew. Congressional hearings lasted for months. Grand jury investigations led to dozens of indictments. International allies demanded explanations for American intelligence operations that had violated treaties and assassinated foreign nationals. But perhaps most importantly, the families of soldiers who died in accidents and training mishaps finally learned the truth about what had really happened to their loved ones. Justice came slowly and imperfectly, as it always does when powerful people are held accountable for their crimes. But it did come. Today, I'm still working at Westfield Shopping Center, still making $12.50 an hour, still wearing a polyester uniform that hangs loose on my aging frame. But I'm no longer invisible. The teenage employees who used to mock me now treat me with the respect due to a man who'd exposed government corruption and survived multiple assassination attempts. The mall management offered me a promotion and a substantial raise, which I politely declined. Because this is my post and I'll hold it until my relief arrives. I'm not a hero. Heroes are supposed to be young and strong and fearless. Heroes aren't supposed to have arthritis and old injuries and nightmares that wake them up at 3:47 a.m. But I am a soldier, and soldiers don't abandon their duty just because the mission gets complicated or the enemy turns out to be wearing the same uniform. My name is Frank Morrison. I'm 66 years old. I'm a retired Army Ranger, a survivor of government betrayal, and a man who learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in foreign countries against foreign enemies, but at home against corruption and conspiracy. And every morning I put on that polyester uniform and walk my patrol route, keeping watch over 3,000 people who trust me to keep them safe. Because that's what Rangers do. We never quit, we never surrender, and we never leave our post unguarded. The war against the shadow government may be over, but the war for American democracy continues every day, fought by ordinary citizens who refuse to accept that corruption and conspiracy are just the way things are. Some battles are won with bullets and explosives. Others are won with truth and transparency, and the stubborn refusal to let the powerful escape accountability for their crimes. I've fought both kinds of battles, and I can tell you that the second kind is harder but more important. Because in the end, it's not enough to defeat the enemy. You have to build something better in its place. And that work begins with one person, in one place, doing one job with integrity and honor and the determination to protect the innocent from those who would prey upon them. My post is a shopping mall in Phoenix, Arizona. My weapon is the truth. My mission is to ensure that what happened to me and my brothers in Afghanistan never happens to anyone else. The watch continues. 5 years have passed since the final battle with the cleanup crew. The political reforms that followed the exposure of the conspiracy have made it harder for shadow organizations to operate within the American intelligence community, though I have no illusions that we've eliminated the problem entirely. Rachel Torres now works as a special investigator for the Senate Intelligence Committee, using her skills to root out corruption and abuse within the agencies that once tried to kill us both. The surviving members of our veteran team have gone on to careers in journalism, law enforcement, and government oversight, all of them determined to ensure that the lessons learned in blood are never forgotten. I'm still at Westfield Shopping Center, but my role has evolved. The mall management has created a new position for me, Director of Veterans Affairs and Community Outreach. My job is to identify military veterans who are struggling with the transition to civilian life and connect them with resources and support networks. It turns out that being invisible for 3 years taught me how to spot other invisible people. The men and women who served their country honorably and now feel forgotten and abandoned by the society they protected. Every week, I encounter former soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen who are working minimum wage jobs despite having skills and experience that should make them valuable to any employer. They're dealing with physical wounds, psychological trauma, financial problems, and the kind of bureaucratic indifference that can break even the strongest spirit. My mission now is to make sure none of them stay invisible. Last month, I helped a former Army medic get hired as a paramedic with the Phoenix Fire Department. The week before that, I connected a former Air Force mechanic with a job at a local aviation company that paid 3 times what he'd been making as a security guard. Yesterday, I sat with a former Marine who'd been contemplating suicide and convinced him to check himself into a VA facility where he could get the help he needed. Small victories, but they add up to something larger. A community of veterans who look out for each other and refuse to let their brothers and sisters fall through the cracks. The work isn't glamorous. It doesn't involve gunfights or international conspiracies or dramatic confrontations with corrupt government officials. But it's the most important mission I've ever been given because it's about honoring the promise we make to every person who puts on a military uniform. That their service matters, their sacrifice has meaning, and they will not be abandoned when the battle is over. I'm 71 years old now. My knees are worse than ever, my shoulder aches constantly, and I need reading glasses to fill out paperwork. But my mind is sharp, my purpose is clear, and my commitment is absolute. Because I learned something important during my years of being invisible. The most powerful weapon a person can possess is not a rifle or a grenade or specialized combat training. It's the willingness to see people who are being ignored, to speak for those who have no voice, and to stand up for principles even when it's dangerous or unpopular to do so. The teenage girl I saved from terrorists 5 years ago is now a second lieutenant in the Army, serving her first deployment in Eastern Europe. She sends me letters describing her experiences as a military police officer and thanking me for inspiring her to choose a career in service to others. The families of the soldiers who were murdered by the cleanup crew have found some measure of peace now that the truth has been revealed and the responsible parties have been held accountable. Several of them have established foundations to help military families deal with loss and to investigate suspicious deaths that might be evidence of ongoing government misconduct. The conspiracy that destroyed my unit and killed so many innocent people has been exposed, its leaders imprisoned, and its operations dismantled. But the work of protecting democracy from corruption and abuse is never finished. Every day brings new challenges, new threats, new tests of whether we as a society will choose transparency over secrecy, accountability over cover-ups, justice over expedience. And every day, ordinary Americans in ordinary jobs make extraordinary choices to do what's right instead of what's easy. My name is Frank Morrison. I'm a 71-year-old mall employee who makes $18.50 an hour helping military veterans navigate the challenges of civilian life. I've been shot at by terrorists, betrayed by my own government, and hunted by assassins who wanted to silence me permanently. I've exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the American intelligence community, survived multiple attempts on my life, and helped bring corrupt officials to justice. But the work I'm most proud of is the quiet, daily effort to ensure that no veteran feels invisible, forgotten, or abandoned. Because in the end, that's what service really means. Not the dramatic moments of combat or crisis, but the steady, unglamorous commitment to take care of the people around you and to build something better for the next generation. The war stories make for exciting reading, but the real victory is measured in lives saved, communities strengthened, and principles upheld in the face of pressure to compromise. I am where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to do for as long as I'm able to do it. The watch continues, the mission evolves, but the commitment remains constant to protect and serve, to speak truth to power, to ensure that no one who has served their country honorably will ever be forgotten or abandoned. This is my post, this is my purpose, this is how I choose to spend whatever time I have left. And if you're reading this story and you're a veteran struggling with the transition to civilian life, know that you are seen, you are valued, and you are not alone. Your service mattered. Your experience has value. Your best days can still be ahead of you. The mission continues, and there's a place for you in it. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. And thank you for never giving up on the idea that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage over comfort and principle over personal gain. Welcome to The Watch. We've been waiting for you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the veterans in your own community who might be struggling in silence, consider reaching out to local veteran organizations or simply taking the time to thank a service member for their sacrifice. Because every veteran deserves to know that their service is remembered, their challenges are understood, and their community is ready to support them in whatever mission comes next. The watch continues, and it's stronger when we all stand together.